When she saw my little toy, her restraint turned into something else entirely, and she helped me take it off. Chapter 1: The Pole. It was my second year of college. By then, I had grown used to the towering, cold buildings on campus and the oppressive silence of the library. My social circle wasn't bad, but deep down, I always felt a sense of emptiness. It was as if nothing truly satisfied me. I was always searching for something until I met Professor Evelyn Calloway. She was 42, tall, with striking features and an undeniable presence. There was something oddly magnetic about her voice, low yet soothing, each word carrying a quiet intensity that seemed to echo through the room. She taught literature, but the way she spoke wasn't just about words. It was as if she was telling a story with her eyes too. I still remember that first class. True passion is hidden within the written word, she said. Sometimes in a single letter, a punctuation mark, or even in the space between. To me, she was the embodiment of passion itself. I started looking forward to her class more than any other. While most students wished the hour would pass faster, time seemed to vanish for me. I wanted more. More of her words. More of her presence. One afternoon, after class, I was hastily gathering my books when they slipped from my hands and scattered across the floor. Just as I reached down to grab them, she beat me to it. Our eyes met. "Miss Hartley," she said with a small smile, "things that fall sometimes show us something new." My heart skipped a beat as she pulled her hands away from my books. Her fingertips nearly brushed against mine. I held my breath. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if she could see right through me. And in that moment, something shifted. Something clicked into place. After that, I started watching her more closely in class. The way she stood, the way she looked away, the way she held her pen. And sometimes I noticed her looking at me too. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But as time went on, I realized something. If I was searching for her eyes, she was searching for mine as well. Was this some kind of game? Or was it just something I had built up in my own head? It wouldn't take long to find out. Chapter 2: First Moves. You can call me Miss Hartley. Most professors didn't bother addressing me by my last name. Maybe they thought I was too bold, too flashy, but I didn't care. I'm the kind of person who makes a statement, not just with my clothes, but with my presence. My fitted blouses, short skirts, and high-heeled boots turn heads on campus. Maybe I was too daring or too inappropriate for some, but that didn't change who I was. Interestingly, Professor Calloway was the one person who never seemed to judge me for it. I started noticing her eyes on me more often during class. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I realized she was watching me too. She followed me with her gaze, especially when I spoke in class or jotted down notes. Sometimes after writing something on the board, she'd turn back and pause just for a second. Small, almost imperceptible details, but I felt every single one of them. One afternoon, just as I was heading toward the door after class, I heard her voice behind me. "Miss Hartley, may I speak with you?" My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I turned around as the last few students filed out. One of them, always the gossip, raised an eyebrow and winked at me. I just shrugged and slid back into my seat like I had all the time in the world. I was close to her, too close. She stepped to the front of her desk and looked at me. I could smell her perfume, warm, woody, with a hint of spice. "I wanted to talk about your assignment," she said. Her voice was steady as always, but I caught the faintest trace of tension beneath it. I leaned forward, crossing my legs. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "Of course, Professor Calloway," I said, adding a touch of softness to my voice. "Is there a problem with it?" She brought a hand to her chin, exhaling slowly. "Not a problem, exactly. just very original. You have a way with words. I laughed. I write with passion, I said, lowering my voice slightly. Isn't that what real literature is about? She studied me carefully, her gaze piercing. Then she tilted her head slightly. Passion is part of literature, yes, but it's a part that needs to be controlled. I stood, smoothing down my skirt. Control, I echoed, smiling faintly. Control can be boring sometimes, Professor. I could see her fighting against something, against me, against herself. But I could also see the flicker of something else in her eyes. By the time I walked out of that room, there was a strange thrill coursing through me. The game had already begun, and we both knew it. Chapter 3, The Chase. There was an invisible thread between Professor Calloway and me, a thread that tightened with every glance, trembled with every accidental touch, and frayed at the edges with every word. We didn't need to say anything. The tension between us had outgrown language. She wanted me, and I wanted her, but there was a line, thin, fragile yet unbroken. That evening, I found myself in the campus library. It was close to 8, and the hallways were nearly deserted. Most students had retreated to their dorms or gone off to parties, but I liked the quiet. I wandered through the shelves, skimming random sentences, letting the stillness settle around me. Then I felt it. Someone was watching me. I turned my head and saw her, Professor Calloway, just a few rows away. She was pretending to browse the books, but I caught the way her eyes flickered toward me. Heat stirred in my chest. This was an opportunity. I slid the book back onto the shelf and took slow, deliberate steps toward her. My heels clicked softly against the wooden floor, each sound slicing through the silence. She didn't look away as I approached. When I reached her, my voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you following me, Professor?" She tensed just for a second, but then that signature, self-assured expression returned to her face. "I was just looking for a book," she said smoothly, a hint of amusement curling at the edge of her lips. She reached for a book on the shelf, her fingers tracing the spine, but I knew better. "Then you're in the wrong section," I murmured, tilting my head slightly. "This is the romance aisle." She hesitated, just for a moment. Then her eyes met mine. "Romance," she said slowly. "Passionate, intense, sometimes even dangerous. That's why some people love it," I replied. For a few long seconds, we just stood there, caught in the thick, charged air between us. And then it happened. She pulled her hand away from the book, and in doing so, her fingers grazed my wrist. The touch was brief, a flicker of heat, a spark of something undeniable. My breath hitched. Was it intentional? Or just a fleeting accident? I saw the way she held still, the way she swallowed just a little too hard. But she said nothing, just smiled, closed the book in her hand, and turned away. "Good night, Miss Hartley," she murmured, walking past me. I stood frozen for a moment, my fingers flexing, unflexing. My pulse pounded in my ears. If this was a game, I was ready to take it further, and I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. Chapter 4, Surprise. That night, I tossed and turned in my bed. My hand still burned where she had touched my wrist. In my head, I kept hearing Professor Calloway's voice. Passion is a part of literature that must be controlled. But I didn't want control. I wanted to cross that line. I wanted to feel her, to have her. And I knew she wanted it too. The next day, as I was walking down the hallway after class, I received an email calling me to her office. "We need to clarify a few points. I'll be waiting in my office." Clarify, huh? Really? A smirk played on my lips. We'd see who clarified what. As I walked toward her office, my heart pounded. The campus was almost deserted. The hallways were empty, and I was carrying a little surprise. You might call it a toy. I was wearing it, you get the idea. I knocked on the door. Come in. When I entered, she was sitting behind her desk. Her glasses were off. When she saw me, I caught the slightest hesitation in her breath. I stepped inside and closed the door without locking it. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. I didn't. Instead, I walked up to her desk, leaned in, and placed my hands on the surface. Is this a punishment, Professor? Her eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, she hesitated. There was a whir in her gaze. Miss Hartley, She started, but never finished the sentence. I knew. She was trying to pull the words away from me. I ran my fingertips along the desk. Tell me you don't want me, I said slowly. She took a deep breath. Her hands rested on the desk, then quickly withdrew. This is wrong. But her voice trembled. I smiled. Straightening up, I took a step closer to her chair. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. And then that first spark ignited. She shot up from her chair, and it happened. She grabbed me, pressed me firmly against the wall. Our bodies collided. We were both breathless. Her hands were pinned beside mine against the wall. I had nowhere to go, but I didn't want to go anywhere. What are you doing? She whispered. I traced my fingertips along the sleeve of her shirt. Burning the boundaries, Professor. She closed her eyes as if fighting something inside herself. But then, she lost. Her hand slid to my waist. Her breath brushed against my neck. And finally, everything unraveled. The room was warm. The air was thick. When she saw my little toy, her restraint turned into something else entirely, and she helped me take it off. At that moment, we both knew there was no going back. From that day on, we were together. In her house, in her office, everywhere. And we're still together. Still happy. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.